All right, welcome everybody. It's 1 o'clock, and so we'll just give a couple of minutes to get started here. Megan, did you have announcements you wanted to do before we start?
I do. Good afternoon. My name is Megan Harris, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by CQL, the Council on Quality and Leadership. Just a few housekeeping announcements before we begin. All attendees are muted in listen-only mode and will not be able to speak throughout the webinar. You may submit any questions you have during the webinar through the questions box. At the end of the webinar, we will be addressing as many questions as time allows. If you experience audio issues, we recommend using the call-in feature rather than the computer audio option. To respect everyone's schedules, we will keep this webinar to 1 hour. If there are any questions we don't answer, look for those answers to come in an upcoming edition of our Capstone e-newsletter. Of course, if you are having any webinar technical questions, we will try to help you through those immediately. This webinar is being recorded. In about a week, we will be emailing out a link to all registrants, giving everyone access to both the webinar recording as well as the PDF version of the PowerPoint slides.
Okay, great. Megan, was that all the announcements that you had?
That's everything, thanks.
All right. So today's topic, we've been going through these basic assurances webinar series and hoping to give some good information and some more clarity around what the different factors of the basic assurances are. And so what I'm really hoping that you guys gain from this webinar today is that you learn a little bit more about what Factor 2, dignity and respect, really means to your organization and how you can implement some of those concepts that we talk about within Factor 2 into what you do on a daily basis. And so as we go through, as Megan said, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those into the chat and we will make sure that we either answer them within the time allotted on here or we will get back to you with those questions. All right, so my name is Jennifer Quigley and I am a quality enhancement specialist with the Council on Quality and Leadership. And I have been working with CQL for almost about 2.5 years now. Previous to that, I worked at a large accredited organization and worked a lot in employment. And so I have a passion for community-based employment and am excited that I get to share that passion multiple different ways working for CQL. So we'll talk a little bit about employment today too, which will be really fun. So, all right. So just a little intro into CQL if this is your first time hearing about us. So we're the Council on Quality and Leadership, and we have a very specific vision. Our vision is a world of dignity, opportunity, and community for all people. Now, when I teach this in person, I really like to emphasize the fact that it says all people, and not just people with disabilities or people who receive services or, people who live in the state that I live in or people who are like me, but it's really all people. And we really feel that by doing that, by seeing that in the future there will be a world of dignity, opportunity, and community for all people, you build great communities and people together. And then our mission is, CQL is dedicated to the definition, measurement, and improvement of personal quality of life. And again, personal is highlighted there, and I really appreciate the fact that we see that the way that you define quality of life is very personalized. And what I see as quality of life and the attributes of it is not the same as what you might see. And so as we're supporting people to individually define that, then we're supporting them to live the best possible lives that they can. All right, and this is a quote that I share very often, is that we really believe that changing and modifying and becoming better than we were yesterday is really important to organizations that are healthy and are really able to provide best practice to the people that they support. And so I really like this quote of quality is a continuous journey and not a destination. So we never quite get to that point where we say, okay, we've made it, we're perfect, we have that perfect quality, we don't have to do anything else. We all wish we could get to that point, but there really is no point where we say we finally made it. It's really a continuous journey that we're always looking for ways to improve and ways to make the lives of the people that we support even better. All right. So as we're coming in and working with our different organizations that we partner with, we really like to use a couple of concepts. And that, I think this really sets us apart from other agencies, is that we really like to use an appreciative approach to quality enhancement. So what this really means is that we look at all the great things that we're doing as organizations and how can we play on those great things. You know, if you have an area within your organization that you're really seeing as providing best practice, why not use all the good things that have worked for that part of it and apply it to areas where you really want to improve even more than you're currently at. And so looking and relying on that positive approach really helps build relationships. It also helps to encourage people to continue along that path of quality improvement. You'll hear some of the terminology that we use is we don't really come out and say that you have deficiencies. You know, we get enough of that with our state audits and other audits that we go through. But we really look at it as opportunities for improvement. So there might be some areas that we look at where you do a pretty good job, but you have that little bit of opportunity to do even better. And we really believe in our organizations and the providers we partner with, that they have the ability to be the best provider out there. And so we'll use the terms of opportunities, not deficiencies. And then again, we really believe in continuous quality improvement. There's never going to be a point where you feel like you've mastered everything. Even in our personal lives, we try to improve on a consistent basis. And so we're going to continue to increase that quality throughout our journey together in that quality journey. So. Oh. All right, so just a brief overview. Today we're going to go through, again, we're going to do a quick introduction into the basic assurances. Now, if you were on the Factor 1 webinar, you might have already heard some of that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the process and evidence collection. And then we're going to go indicator by indicator. There are 5 indicators in Factor 2. And we're going to talk a little bit about the probes and what those mean. We're going to talk about how that might be implemented in your organization, and also as a CQL reviewer, what we would be looking for in each one of those areas. We'll talk a little bit about the validation and decision making and how we come to that. We'll also talk about what data points you might be looking at, especially when you're looking to build that Factor 10 quality analysis within your organization to make sure that all those different factors are in place. So we'll give you some ideas for that. And then we'll take questions at the end if you have any. Make sure you add those into that chat box. All right, so a basic introduction to the basic assurances. I always like to tell people that the basic assurances are exactly what they say. They're really just the basic things that we should assure that people have in their lives. They're that part of being that people should be supported to obtain just to be able to have a pretty good life. So basic assurances are the standards that we use in order to help organizations to achieve quality management within their organization. All right, and as we talked about before, there are 10 factors within the basic assurances. This is a listing of those. Last webinar was based on 1, rights, protection, and promotion. And today we're going to be doing dignity and respect. And then going forward, we're going to have each one of these once a month to be able to help support you guys to get some more information about how you can support these in your organization. Okay. And I always recommend when you're looking into being accredited or you have questions about it, that you really reference that manual that's pictured there on the screen. It helps give you really some good information about what the factor looks like and what's important about it. It gives you some narrative around that. But it also talks a little bit about what we look for when we come for accreditation. So it's really helpful. All right, so some key concepts with the basic assurances is they really focus on essential, fundamental, and non-negotiable requirements for all services and support providers. So I like the term non-negotiable. That really makes me think that these things need to be in place. They're those quality assurance level items that we should support people to make sure that they are receiving those types of supports. And within dignity and respect, we'll talk a little bit about what some of those non-negotiables are. Organizations are encouraged to implement consensus-based best practices in relation to each measure. And the basic assurances require more than compliance with licensing and certification standards. We use this tool to understand the effectiveness of practice through the perspective of each person. So sometimes when we come out and work with organizations, there might be some different standards that a state licensing might require. And we see the basic assurances a lot have a little bit of a higher standard than those. And so we do acknowledge the fact that we do have a little bit higher standards, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of organizations come to work with us. So. All right, so the basic structure of the basic assurances, and we just give you a review of this so that as we're going through this webinar, some of that terminology that we use is really important so that we can stay on the same page. But so within each factor, we just talked about there are 10 different factors. Today we're focusing on factor 2. This factor is dignity and respect. So we're going to talk about that overarching factor. And then within each factor, there's an indicator. For example, indicator 2A is people are treated as people first. And that's what we consider kind of a subtopic of that above topic area. And then underneath each one of those indicators are probes. So this is a listing of the probes for 2A. We would consider the first one, are people called by their preferred names, as probe 2A1. So as we're talking about things and as you're working within your work groups or going through your accreditation, that's some of the terminology that we like to use in the structure of basic assurances. All right, so then within each one of those factors, we look at 2 different components. So we look at systems and we look at practice. Systems is really about those organizational supports that provide the structure for organizational practices. They include things like policies, procedures, staff trainings, or other things that might be more of a solid written down type of a thing. Something that you would follow with the practices. So organizational practice is what is observed in daily operations. This demonstrates how an organization's systems are actually put into action. So we will come in and we will look to see if the structure of what you're doing is there. If you have policies and procedures, maybe forms, trainings, just any support around to make that practice be possible. And then we'll look to see that if that practice is actually there. Now, sometimes we see, especially in dignity and respect, we'll see that the practice might be there. So you're treating people with dignity and respect, you're listening to their concerns, but there's no real system. You're just really happen to be doing it because you know that's the best thing to do. And so we'll ask you to put a system in place to make sure that those practices are solidified for the future, so that new people who come in can see actually in writing what they're required to do and how they're required to be supported. So again, for each one of those areas for systems and practice, we'll determine whether or not the system is in place or not and the practice is in place or not. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the process and the evidence. Right, in order to get some of that information, we're going to do quite a few things. We're going to look at documents. So we might look at your policies and procedures. Well, we will look at your policies and procedures. We might ask for additional documentation. So for this area, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later too, we might look at your grievance log or your complaint log or feedback log, whatever you call it, and see kind of what's there and see what your turnaround time and your follow-through time is. We'll, of course, do observations and visits. So we get a lot of information in dignity and respect through actually interacting with people, observing you guys interact with people, and talking to people about what their feelings are. We hold focus groups. Usually we have either 2 to 3 focus groups, one being self-advocates, the other one being staff focus groups, and then the third one occasionally will be the guardians and family members focus groups. And that really gives us a lot of good information. I always tell organizations to really try hard to have those focus groups be all-inclusive of different service lines, but also have people that can give you really good feedback so that you can use that feedback to really change your organization. We get some of the best feedback from each one of those groups that have really helped organizations to either change the way that they're doing things or identify new areas of growth that they can utilize. So. And then we'll do a factor review, and the factor review is really sitting down after we've gone through a lot of documents and talking to you about how this really does look like in your organization. My favorite part about those factor review meetings is it's not just looking and evaluating what you do, but it's also giving feedback and giving resources. And so always use your reviewers as an opportunity to really get some great resources from them in the different factors, maybe some areas that you've been struggling with a little bit. If you let us know that, then we can support you and give you some more information in there. And then the final one, of course, personal outcome measure interviews. And so we will do a variety of personal outcome measure interviews to really get a good view of how you're supporting this one person and to find out areas that you're doing great at, but also areas that we might be able to help you focus on a little bit more. All right, so again, document review, we'll look at policy and procedures, committee meeting minutes, completed assessments, staff training records, people's records, of course, with their permission, complaint logs, and then I added on to here also wage data too for factor 2. All right, so when we're doing our observation and visits, we're really listening for a couple of things. We're asking questions about, are we listening for people first language? We're looking at the way that people's homes are decorated. Is it similar to other people in the community? So when I walk into a home, does it look like a home? Or does it look like there are postings on the wall and, you know, there's a big sign that says, staff, make sure you leave your personal belongings in the car or whatnot. We just really look to see whether or not it feels like I'm walking to a person's home that they've individually decorated to. Are people afforded privacy during their daily routines? So we look to find out if people are allowed to have the same amount of privacy that you and I would request and desire, and what they specifically request and desire. So are people observed to have clothing, personal items, and hairstyles that reflect their preferences? So are people supported if they have a personal preference that might be different from the norm? Are they supported to be clean and to really feel proud of the way that they look? Are the activities observed appropriate for people's age and culture? And this is one thing that as we do observations, we really look for some culturally normative things and some supporting people to really have a positive self-image. Do activities promote people's dignity? Again, just making sure that we are looking at people with the utmost respect, and we'll talk a little bit about that big R respect, and how people are supported to continue with that. Are people engaged in meaningful work for which they are paid fairly? So again, we will look at the different work sites if you do support people with that. And we're hoping to see a variety of different work sites and work sites that are really based on people discovering what's important to them and how they see their career futures looking. So another question that I like is there camaraderie among staff and people receiving services? How are people interacting with each other? Is it very clinical and sterile, or are people actually able to have work-based relationships and to be respectful of each other and to interact appropriately? So, all right, so again, we talked a little bit about this, but focus groups are conducted with people supported, staff, families, and others, depending on the types of services you provide. We really ask a lot of questions around how does this probe or indicator look like in this organization. So for dignity and respect, what I might ask is, do people listen to your ideas and honor your choices? Or I might ask staff, what is your role in assisting a person to feel respected? Have you been trained on that? And to family members, how does the organization show respect to your family member? Really getting some of that, their viewpoint into how dignity and respect really reflects in the organization is important. All right, and then again with the factor review, each factor that have a role in systems and practice pertaining to that factor. One thing I find with dignity and respect as I meet with organizations is a couple of things. We don't always have the right people in the room to talk about this factor. So making sure that you have a representative from each one of your service lines. So someone from residential, if you provide that, someone from day program, workshop, supported employment, someone from community integration, all that kind of stuff. Making sure that someone is there to say, how does that look like in the service that you provide that you're responsible for? And then make sure that you're welcome to bring any type of examples, success stories, where you think that that indicator and probe is present for your organization. And again, it's an opportunity to work collaboratively. So make sure you ask questions. This isn't one of those processes that some of us are used to where you just kind of sit and wait and answer questions as they're asked. But we really want it to be very collaborative and a learning experience for both of us. So. All right, and then again, we're going to talk a little bit about the personal outcome measures, and it just really allows us to see quality through the perspective of that one person that we're talking to. And we understand that personal outcome measures are a snapshot in someone's life. However, we're able to really get a lot of good insight as we dig a little bit deeper into how these basic assurances are reflected into the personal outcome measures for the person. Interviewees are often selected from categories such as people with a restriction in place, people with extensive health supports, or people that have experienced abuse and neglect. The other area that we also do is someone who has a recent grievance or complaint, which would apply to factor 2. All right, so let's jump right into the indicators. Again, as we're going through these, you have questions, please feel free to ask. So the first one is people are treated as people first. Now that seems pretty simple. However, there's quite a few different areas that that relates to. As we talk about people are treated as people first, we really talk about using the language that we use, the interactions that we have with people, and also how people are involved in their supports. Are they able to give any feedback to that? All right, so within this indicator, there are 5 different probes. The first probe is, are people called by their preferred names? Now, when we're going through and we're observing, a lot of this is through observation. And what we look for is, are there people that are being called nicknames? Are they being called, hey, my buddy, hey, honey, darling, sweetie? You know, are they used, this is JoJo, but and he really doesn't like the name JoJo. We're really looking for, what do people prefer to be called? This is something that's pretty personal to me because I have very specific names that I like to be called. I don't know why, but I don't mind being called Jennifer, which is my given name, and Jen is my preferred name. But when people call me Jenny, I really don't like it. So I make sure that I tell people, you know, Jenny is not my preferred name. You're welcome to call me Jen or Jennifer. But how many times do we ask people who are supported what their preferred name is? A lot of times we find that we get really comfortable with people and we might make up a nickname that really is meant to be endearing, but asking their preference is really important in this. So yeah. And then number 2, the probe for this one is, does staff refrain from referring to people by their disability, diagnosis, or condition? Now, this one, it sounds pretty self-explanatory, but some things that we hear sometimes that would affect this probe would be things like referring to people as wheelchairs when they use a wheelchair for mobility, or saying, I work at the behavior house. Anything that really kind of clumps people together and defines them by their diagnosis or condition would not be treating people as people first. It would be treating them as diagnosis first. And so we really want to make sure that we're using that person first language. In when we refer to either where they live or who they are or anything like that. So doing some staff training around how do you really use person first language. And then probe number 3 is, are people extended the same common courtesies anyone would expect? And when I was thinking about this one, I really wanted to find out, what is common courtesy? And what does that really mean? Because it's kind of one of those terms that isn't really easily defined. And so so when I looked that up, it was really talks about respectful practices, and which I think really mirrored well with dignity and respect. But so common courtesies are things that you would expect someone that you didn't know to give you. So situations like making sure that all interactions are socially acceptable and show respect means that knocking and waiting to enter someone's home, rather than just either opening the door or doing a quick knock and open. Really knocking and waiting for someone who lives there to answer the door. The other thing that is a personal pet peeve is not asking someone if they've had a bowel movement in front of other people. That's something that I would not expect someone in common conversation to ask me. And I understand that sometimes it's needed for medical reasons, but finding a really respectful way to talk about that would be great. The other thing that would 3 would be not interrupting or talking for people. So really allowing people to have that place in conversation where they're able to hold their own and have a great interaction with other people without us having to talk for them or talk over top of them. All right, and then number 4 is, does the organization's name, letterhead, and internal public communications promote a positive image of people, services, and supports? This really talks a little bit about what the organization is named and how it presents itself to the public, looking at, does that promote people as being capable and independent, or does it have more of a charity feel to it? So are we looking at people as being served to, or people being really independent and capable? And that's one thing. So we'll look at the letterhead that you use. We'll look at some of your brochures. We'll look at the name of the organization and the signage, and just really look to see that promotes people as being people first. And then number 5, our support staff trained to promote dignity, respect, and to recognize each person as a unique individual. Of course, for this one, we're looking at training records to see, is there some part of your training curriculum that you talk about how do you promote dignity and respect, not just from your staff treating people that way, but what happens if you're in the community and other people are not treating people with dignity and respect? What is the response that staff should have? That's something that we need to help support our staff in how to do. And now with this indicator, we're going to determine this is in place by observing interactions during visits, talking with staff and self-advocates during focus groups, and looking at the training documentation. All right, on to indicator B. This indicator is the organization respects people's concerns and responds accordingly. Notice that it doesn't say that the organization respects people's grievances. It really talks about concerns and really their feedback. What is the feedback that people are giving, and do we listen actively to that, and do we respond to that? We listen to concerns from people supported, family members, and other stakeholders. And all of these things can be very, very useful tools to organizations to increase quality. Not only does this greatly increase the satisfaction and quality of life for people supported, but it can also effectively inform strategic and programmatic planning for your organization. All right, so we're going to start this one off with taking a little poll. So if you go to your computer screens, there should be a poll popping up in just a second. There we go. All right, so go ahead and vote. The question is, which of the following is an example of a complaint, problem, or concern that you should document? John mentioned to the evening staff he doesn't like that morning staff make him wake up at 5 a.m. for a shower. Patty's mother doesn't like the way staff support Patty to style her hair. A support coordinator states that they are concerned about how goals are tracked. Do you think it's one of those, none of those, or all of those? Please go ahead and vote. All right, so here is the results of our poll. Hopefully you guys can see that. 14% thought John mentioned to the evening staff that he doesn't like the morning staff waking him up at 5 a.m. for a shower. 1% said Patty's mother doesn't like the way her hair is. 3% said a support coordinator states they're concerned about goals are tracked. 1% said none of the above, and then 81% said all of the above. So I would agree with the majority here that 81% that all of these are complaints that should be documented. It's really informational for us to be able to know kind of where some of those concerns at and how we're going to follow those up. It's a really good data point for you to start looking at. So let's look at the probes for this one. Sorry, it's not letting me advance slides. Oh, there we go. All right, sorry about that. So for this indicator, we have 7 different probes they're going to be looking at. The first one is, do people receive needed supports to report complaints, problems, or concerns? And then really, along with that is, are families and legal authorized representatives informed about and do they understand the organization's complaint process? So really what these first two are about is, do the people receiving services, and then adding that number two is, our families and legally authorized representatives, do they know what the process is for complaints, problems, or concerns? And are they supported to be able to make those complaints or concerns known? Do they understand what the process is? So it's really not only helping people to be able to access those systems that you have in place to key into some of that complaint process, but also making sure that people receive the information and are trained about it. So we'll be looking at two different things. Do you train people to know what their avenues of complaints are? And then do you support them around actually utilizing those systems that are in place? All right, for three, do people receive a timely response to the complaints that is relevant and understandable? So for this one, it's really essential that follow-up is happening. And I'll tell you, I've done lots of different focus groups within accreditation and outside of accreditation, and communication is one of the key things that people say is really lacking. And when I dig into that issue a little bit further, I tend to find that it's not so much that the organizations aren't communicating with their staff. Most of the time, it's that the follow-up isn't happening. So when staff or people supported are saying, I'm not happy with this, and they're actually taking the risk of coming forward and saying, this is not okay with me, are we really going back and saying, I've heard your complaint, your concern, and this is how it was resolved. Is that enough for you? Coming and doing that closing of the loop is so important for people to really feel like their complaints have been validated and at least listened to, and you've responded to those. And so making sure that they're receiving that response, and then also document that you've responded. That really helps you go back into track and trend and find out, if Jen has been having this concern all the time, and this is how we can resolve that complaint or that concern for her, maybe this could relate to other areas of our organization also. All right, and then does the organization review and analyze complaint information at least annually? This is really important for you. We are really a data-based organization, and we really believe that looking at that information and analyzing that information is of the utmost usefulness for you, because if you just collect it and you don't do anything with it, it's really not useful. So looking at that, analyzing it, breaking it apart to different programs, looking at it for different days, different months, really manipulating that data so you can see how people are feeling with their services. Are they feeling like they're not getting out enough in the winter in Iowa, which is where I'm from right now? And what does that do to, and how can we change that for people? So using that information that you're gathering in a really meaningful way. Then the next one, does the organization implement a system to determine people's satisfaction with their services and supports? This one is really around how do you find out if people are satisfied and if they are making informed choices around their services? Organizations will do this in a couple of different ways. A lot of organizations will use a survey. And it's really up to your organization to determine what is best for you. You can also use the personal outcome measures as a system to determine people's satisfaction with their services. If you're using that tool effectively, then you'll find out if people are really choosing some of those services, and also if they are satisfied with what's going on and how they're being supported. So again, it's really up to you how you determine to implement the system. We've really left it kind of open so that whatever works best for your organization, as long as you are determining people's satisfaction with their services on an annual basis. All right, then number 6, does the organization use information about its satisfaction to improve services and supports? Again, it's really pulling from probe number 5 is, once you gather that information, what are you doing about it? It's really important for you to keep information and documentation around, okay, so we've learned that people are not satisfied with this aspect of their services, and we find that 80% of people are not satisfied with that. What is your action step after that based on that information? So again, we're not just collecting information just to collect it, we're doing something with it. And a lot of times that satisfaction information will then lead into your strategic planning. So you'll be able to start having some action plans based on what people are telling you about their services and support. All right, and then number 7, does the organization routinely use CQL's personal outcome measures assessment tool to learn about people's opinions, preferences, likes, dislikes, wants, and personal needs? Does it respond to what it learns about the person, adjust its supports as necessary? Again, we ask that our organizations that are accredited with us use the personal outcome measures assessment tool, and that is because it is really a great tool out there to be able to find out all this information about the person. The questions that we ask specifically really get to kind of the depth of what the person likes, dislikes, wants. All that stuff is really important to really being able to support a person on a personal level. And so we ask that you use that tool and that you actually respond to the information that you learn during that tool. All right, indicator C, people have privacy. Now, this indicator is a really important indicator. You know, privacy is something that's very important to all of our lives. And when doing more research on this, I always think to myself, has there ever been a situation where any of you have lived in a situation where you haven't had the privacy that you've wanted? And I always think back when I was in college. My first couple of years in college, I lived in a dorm. I think a lot of people do that. And I lived in a dorm where there were 6 girls living in a 3-bedroom house, apartment really, and it was only about 800 square feet. So you can just imagine there were 6 18, 19, 20-year-old girls living in this really small apartment, 1 bathroom, and not very much space. And so I think there were very few times during that time in my life where I felt like I could be actually alone because I had a roommate. And then in the common areas, there was always somebody coming and going from classes. And it was a really stressful time in my life because, you know, I didn't feel like I could have any private time. I couldn't make a phone call without my roommate listening in to what I was saying, telling my parents or my friends. And so privacy is really important to us. In fact, it's in the UN Declaration of Human Rights. It states, no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. So the fact that privacy is a right is very specifically written in the UN Declaration of Rights, and it's something that's really important to most of us. Even if you're a really social person, being able to be alone is very important to you. All right, so this one, this indicator has 8 different probes. The first probe is personal information shared only with the person's permission or that of their legally authorized representatives? Now, a lot of organizations will look at this as, do I have a release of information in place? And if I do, then that's met. But what we would ask you to do is to go even a step further with that. We would ask that as information is shared, that we ask the person's permission. So if a service coordinator or someone comes to me and says, I need you to send this information to this place, then we let the person know this is what their request has been. Are you okay with that? And I know logistically that sounds like a lot, but really best practice is that people are aware of where their information is going. And when you think of your own personal records, that tends to happen a little bit more. So. And then number 2, do people have the space and opportunity to speak on the phone, open and read mail, and visit others privately? And again, that's really important. And a lot of times when we look at this probe, we think, oh yeah, they have bedrooms and they're able to go into their bedrooms. But really, I would ask you to look a little bit further into that. And how many times when you have, you know, someone that you don't know really well come over to your house, do you really invite them into your bedroom and sit on your bed and talk to them? Or do you have an opportunity to be in a more public place in your home, like the living room or the kitchen table, to sit and speak and where no one else can hear? So really being able to be creative around how you can provide that opportunity for people to visit with others privately. All right, and then 3, are entrance doors lockable by the person? Now, notice it doesn't say, does the person have a key to their front door? This is a little bit more than that. So is access given in a way that the person can control the lockability of their front door? If they don't have the ability to use a key, are you providing them with, you know, an app on their phone that can unlock their front door. I do that from my own house right now, is that I can just pull up an app and unlock my front door. Do they have a keypad? Whatever it is that helps them to be able to, whether or not that front door is locked. Do people have a place and opportunity to be by themselves during the day? And this, again, is just culturally normative. So, you know, if I am working in a situation where I'm not by myself during the day, is that the same for everybody else that is at work? But when I come home, do I have the opportunity to go into my room and to have a little bit of private time? All right, and then 5 and 6, do people have an option to choose a private bedroom if receiving residential supports? And do people have the choice of roommates if applicable? And now again, this is really all about people having choice and people being able to have a little bit more privacy. And then 7, do support staff demonstrate respect for people's privacy when providing needed supports for dressing and personal hygiene and when entering people's rooms? Some things that I see in this is as going to day programs where there's a person-specific bathroom that staff don't use, but people supported do use, that doesn't have any stalls on the bathroom, in the bathroom, it's a multiple-use bathroom. The other thing is having people dress in the front room of homes. Just making sure that you're really helping people to have privacy, especially when receiving those kind of intimate personal hygiene needs. And then do visitors respect people's privacy? Do people who come to the home, including staff who are visitors, family members and others, really respect their ability to be able to choose and be alone and invite people in, not have people just come in? All right, indicator D, supports and services enhance dignity and respect. So this one again has 8 different probes. In the interest of time, I'm going to kind of go over what some of the things that we're going to look for with this indicator. It's really, are people being able to be supported of personal cleanliness and appearance as needed and requested? It's really, how do people look and how do they prefer to carry themselves, and are we supporting them in that manner? Do people have autonomy and independence in making life choices, including control over their own schedules and routines? So are people driving what they do during the day? You know, if I wake up on a Saturday morning, I don't necessarily need to wake up at 6 a.m. to make sure I get in my 7 o'clock a.m. shower. But I can sleep in and I can decide when I'm going to eat breakfast, and I might go for a walk or go to the mall. You know, are people really able to make those decisions? And as I always like to point out, this also includes day programs. So do we have to attend day program between the hours of 9 and 3 every day? Or can we say, you know what, I'm not a morning person. I would love to be able to have my day routine include a day program that might be from 1 to 5 instead of that. Do people receive information about their supports and services in plain language that is accessible and reflects cultural considerations? So not only making sure that service plans or other support mechanisms are in a language that helps people to really understand them, but also reflects their cultural preferences is really important. So this might include, you know, having it in a picture format or different languages, or even a video format for people, depending on how they require or would like to have that. And again, a large part with this services and supports enhance dignity and respect is, are supports provided only to the extent needed to the person? Sometimes when people are doing their self-assessment, this is a question that gets, that people misunderstand, but we're really looking that people are not over supporting people, that you're supporting people to be as independent as possible, and we're not putting supports in place that would be a barrier to independence. Not so much that, you know, a lot of times people will answer this as, yes, we support them as much as we possibly can, but really we're looking for you to only provide those to the point that they need it. Are people provided options for support settings, including generic settings? Now, generic settings we determine are settings that can be used by other people. So is it a dentist that I would go to, or is it a dentist that the agency owns that everyone that they support goes to? Are they really given options to be able to choose where they're going? And then again, are supports provided in integrated settings? Are they settings that anyone can access? Are they settings that are specific to people with disabilities? And again, Are people supported to decorate their homes as they choose and to maintain homes that are safe and sanitary? This is really around having the dignity to really decide what your home looks like, how it's cared for, making sure that it's a safe and sanitary situation for you. And our transportation and other supports provided so people can access community services similar to those used by community at large. Can people get out and have access to the community so that they can have a place and a role in that community? All right, indicator E, people have meaningful work and activity choices. Again, this is my favorite, but it's really about supporting people to have a full and meaningful life and to be able to work. You know, it's culturally normative for people who are, you know, in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s nowadays, 70s, to be working. And are people given that option to work or choose other activities? All right, so we are going to do a poll for this one too. All right, so with this one, we talk a little bit about what a fair wage is. When we're making decisions on are people paid fair wages, would 14C subminimum wage be considered fair wage? A lot of people have questions about what that term fair means. So you'll take a couple seconds and vote. All right, should we close that voting? And the results are, all right, so we got 20% of people said true, 80% said false. Now, this was kind of a question that I purposely put in there to have some discussion, but what we would consider a wage would be above minimum wage, a fair wage. And so what that means is that, you know, for me, I know when I go out and get a job, regardless of my productivity rate, I get paid at least minimum wage and above. And so we're really looking for organizations to support people to be paid above minimum wage. And we'll talk a little bit about that with our data collection, but we really want to look at how much people are getting paid and try to increase that as much as possible to even above minimum wage. So, all right, thank you for that. All right, so indicator E, this is really all about our work indicator. So people have meaningful work and activity choices. We really want people to be able to decide what work looks like to them. So the first one is personal preferences assessments, identify the kinds of work and recreational activities people want. And then number two, do people receive the support needed to make choices about the kinds of work and activities they prefer? So a lot of times when I go into organizations, I see that assessments are completed to find out whether or not someone can or cannot work. And that's something that we highly suggest not doing. It's not deciding whether or not someone can or cannot work. We hope that the organizations that we're with have the philosophy that everyone can work. We just got to figure out how to make it work for them. So the preference assessment should be based on what are people's desires around that and how do we help support them. Then our services and supports focused on assisting people to achieve their goals and desires. And activity and work options available to people that are culturally normative and appropriate. You know, just in general, this indicator is really, are people treated with dignity and respect around how they work, what they do for work? Do we support them to generate income, to be able to have a fulfilling life? You know, unfortunately, in order to kind of do some of those things that we really want to do there, we need to have money. And so helping people to generate income to get out of poverty that disability sometimes can lead to is really important for our organizations. And then the last probe here that I'm going to focus on too are people actively supported to control their personal resources. So are they making decisions around where those personal resources go? Are they informed? And are they able to make decisions to gain more personal resources? All right, so if you want to get a little bit more information about dignity and respect, here are a couple of the past webinars. There are lots and lots more webinars available online, but these are three that I found that were very related. Transforming employment, so moving from site-based to community-based employment, there's a webinar on that. The entire series of decision-making with POMS would relate to dignity and respect. And then there's a really good one on modern ableism and disability prejudice that will help you be informed on what that looks like today. All right, so let's talk a little bit about validation and decision making. How do we look at that? So During an accreditation, each probe is validated to be present or not present based on the evidence obtained during the review. And then based on the information that we receive through the probes, then we look at each indicator. And at each indicator level, we look to find out if the systems and the practice is present or not. And we're really looking at whether or not there's a preponderance of evidence related to an indicator. We don't really look at how many probes are to be found there. We just look at, does the overall practice seem to be there in a way that takes away some of those little outliers, but really looks at how does it look like for the organization. And then during an accreditation, when an indicator is found to not be present in system or practice, we ask for an action plan to how are we going to better align that within that indicator. And then the title of the indicator is not always a complete description of all the elements contained within an indicator. As we're grouping together some of those probes, putting it under the indicator, it's not always a direct correlation there. All right, so here are some of the measurables that are in Factor 2. Some of the things that you can use in your Factor 10 plan as you're developing those. So the percentage of people who are satisfied with the resolution of their grievances might be a good one. The number of people working in integrated employment settings. The percentage of people with POM interviews completed. The percentage of people with entrance door keys or other mechanism. The percentage of staff trained to promote dignity and respect. The amount of money people are paid. And kind of the average of wages there to find out if people are being paid fairly. And then some of the POM, the personal outcome measures that are related to this are people are respected, people are treated fairly, people choose where and with whom they live, people choose where they work, people choose services, and people choose personal goals. And there were so many different outcomes on this that we, that could be listed here that I could not list because of the size of it. There was just a lot. So let's look at some of the Factor 2 data. All right, so within the Factor 2 data, on average, agencies had 8.4 of the 10 possible Factor 2 indicators, systems and practices present. So this is from data from 2015 to 2017. It was about 177 different organizations. For this one, on average, agencies had 4.3 out of the 5 possible Factor 2 indicator systems in place, and have an average of 41 of the practices in place. All right. This figure shows what percentage of agencies had each indicator present on CQL review. For 2B system present, as you'll see, 77.7% of people had that for systems, and then 77.5% had practice. That number is really close, so it shows that it might be closely correlated there. And so that's really good information to look at. All right, so on this one, we're looking at it shows the differences in organizational self-assessment and CQL reviewers for the Factor 2 indicators. The numbers show that the organization significantly overestimate the presence of every single factor in Factor 2 compared to what CQL reviewers found. Organizations were most likely to overestimate systems and practice for 2E, which is people have meaningful work and activity choices. In fact, the organizations thought this was in place 22 to 23% more often than our CQL reviewers. All right, for this one, this figure shows the impact of having Factor 2, both the systems and practices in place, can have on the total basic assurances present. According to our statistical analysis, the more Factor 2 indicators an organization present, the better they do on the total basic assurances. For example, an organization that has none of the Factor 2 indicators present is expected to have 59% of the total 92 indicators present. Whereas an organization that has all 10 of the Factor 2 indicators present is expected to have 92% of the total basic assurances present. When organizations attend to the dignity and respect in both their systems and practices, they're not only significantly more likely to have all the other factors present, they're also more likely to enhance the quality of services. All right, so these are the most impactful probes. So the probes that have the most impact on whether or not the rest of those indicators are present. It's really important that it lists them in order of importance. Um, so these are the ones that have the greatest relationship with having all of factor 2 present. So if you have, do people have autonomy and independence in making life choices, including control over their own schedules and routines? If that is present, it's more likely that the rest of the indicator is present. All right, so that was factor 2, dignity and respect. A lot of different areas that we talked about, including, I remember, your grievances and your complaints, and then also employment. And then was there any questions that we had, Megan?
It looks like we do have one question. She states, following is an argument I often hear. I'm curious how you would respond. You and I would receive minimum wage despite productivity. However, if we didn't produce as expected, we would be terminated. Is it better to be terminated or paid less based on your actual productivity? If we employ despite productivity, isn't that charity?
That is a really good question. And so what my response to that would be is that if productivity is low to the point that the person is possibly being terminated, then is that really a good fit for the person? And we need to find a different job. And so for me, if I feel like my productivity isn't the greatest, and if I'm not really satisfied with my job, then my productivity is going to go down. And so, you know, finding that right fit for people and making sure we do a really good and comprehensive discovery process, then we're able to find those jobs that people could make above minimum wage and be effective and productive in. And so I would look at the job fit rather than whether or not they should stay in a job that they're not able to meet the productivity requirements.
I think we have time for one more question. How do you handle third-generation staff who have learned about an individual from their family members or previous staff who don't seem to recognize a change in a person?
That's a really good question. So the way that I'm reading that is that you're asking how do you deal with the fact that some people say that they really, really know this person and they know that this is exactly how they're going to be. I'm hoping that I'm reading that correctly. And then as you learn more things, especially through the personal outcome measure interviews, and people are like, oh, no, that's not them. So one thing that we do in our PALM workshops is we do a little activity called the penny activity that I love. And so it's all about looking at a penny and how many times do we handle pennies throughout the year, which has kind of decreased recently, but we really handle pennies all the time. We should know that penny inside and out, and we should be able to draw it really well. When we find out that actually most people could not tell you everything that's on a penny, even though they've seen that penny thousands of times throughout the year. And so just helping people to understand that people change and that you don't necessarily know that person, even though you've been around them tons. And really the way that you ask questions will also give you more answers and different results. And so helping people to know that change is inevitable in everybody, hopefully that helps a little bit.
Okay, well, looks like we're just about out of time. So thank you, Jen, for everything that you've shared with us today. And thank you to all of you for joining us. Today's webinar has been recorded and in about a week, we'll be sending the link to the recording and the PDF version of the slides. And if you are a certified interviewer or trainer, your attendance today has been recorded in our database to meet your continuing education requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.